Think Tank Watch. So, although this is an episode of Think Tank Watch, it's also an opportunity to review Rishi Sunak's 5 pledges and see how well he's done with them. To be honest, he seems to have dropped some, made new ones up and pretended he hadn't, and I don't know where he is with it, but here we have a panel of guests on Newsnight back in mid-2023.
Let's talk to our Newsnight panel about what goals are achievable and if they're not, then what. Fraser Nelson is editor of The Spectator magazine. Tim Montgomerie was special advisor to Prime Minister Boris Johnson in 2019 and founded the Conservative Home website.
And don't forget that he's also the founder of the think tank Centre for Social Justice.
And Aisha Predictions is a former political advisor to the Labour Party and now presents on Times Radio. So, Fraser, with the 5 pledges, is he going to reach them? Is he going to fail?
So, as Victoria said, each guest is going to give their best judgment on how well Rishi will do with his 5 pledges. As this is 7 or 8 months ago, we can see how well each guest predicted the outcome. What do you think Tim Montgomerie will predict for Sunak? Let's find out, but first, Fraser Nelson.
Well, let's start with halving inflation. When he made the pledge, it looked achievable, but it was forecast to be 3% and needs it to be 5.5%. But now the wind is blowing the wrong way. It looks like he's going to miss that pledge of halving inflation. Now, but he said it'd grow the economy. Now, it's a rare Prime Minister who doesn't grow the economy at some point. People take that to mean serious growth, noticeable growth. Instead, we're seeing incomes, real incomes, decline at the fastest rate for decades, and we're going to notice instead gossamer growth that's not really worthy of the name.
So like 0.1%?
Something like that. It will not feel like growth. So this will even if it's technically hit, it will feel to voters, will come the election as a promise that was not kept. Now, with debts falling, it was never going to fall. It was very disingenuous of him to pretend.
Why did he say it then?
Well, because when he said falling, what he meant was rising, but not quite as fast as the economy. In other words, the ratio will be falling. But even the ratio is destined to go up this year, next year. The official forecasts show, but however you want to define it, this pledge is going to be failed as well. Now, then there's waiting lists. It seemed in October that they were stagnating a bit. He looked as if, because right now the NHS has been given huge orders, meet the pledge, get the waiting lists down, but the doctors' strikes have made that harder to achieve. The waiting lists are now going up. So compared to when he made the pledge, I think we're going to see waiting lists up as well. Therefore, the pledge failed. Now, that leaves us with the most audacious pledge to stop, in his words, these small boats. Now, I reckon that might have been, at a push, achievable had he got the Rwanda plan going up. We saw when he started the Albanian deportations, arrivals from Albania, which were half of the total at one point, fell off a cliff, down by 99%. But now the courts have found against his Rwanda plan. It doesn't look like that's going to change until next year. Therefore, when it comes to stopping the small boats, another fail. So 5 pledges, and I'm afraid to say it looks right now like 5 failures.
Thank you very much, Fraser. Let's do a little swap with Tim. Tim, OK, where are you on the pledges then?
Well, after all that gloom, I'm going to try and be a little bit more optimistic. And, yeah, we've had a bad first 6 months on inflation, but the consensus of forecasts is that we should just about hit Rishi Sunak's target on halving inflation.
Which means prices are still rising, but not as fast.
But not as fast as they have been. Whether that will feel, Fraser's general point about whether it feels for voters that things have changed, that's another question.
Yeah.
But technically, I think he will hit the target. I also think he'll hit the target on the economy growing.
Meaningful growth?
Not meaningful growth, but unlike a lot of economies on the continent, we've avoided a recession. That's not nothing. And I think Rishi Sunak will be able to bag that. Partly because of something that really annoys Tory MPs, the increase in income tax thresholds. There's enough contribution into the exchequer to allow him to technically say that he's hit the debt target.
Technically,
all
a lot of heavy lifting.
Even though I'm giving him green on all of these 5 things, whether the people will feel that the competence of the Tory party has been recovered, which was what the basic intention of these was, to show that the Conservative Party could actually deliver things. That's another question. But on actually whether he can say by the letter of the pledge he's met them, I think he'll also be able to do that on waiting lists. But it'll be more about reducing the very long waiting list rather than the number of people on waiting lists altogether. This is the most controversial one. He won't stop the small boats, but he will reduce the total number, I think, coming across the channel.
The promise was to stop the boats.
It was in the speech, but if you watched the speech at the time in the new year, journalist after journalist, after he spoke, sought clarification, and he then would only sort of say, reducing the number.
Fair enough, thank you. But he did say stop the boats twice in that speech, because I've looked at it again today. Thank you. Right, Aisha, do come in. So where are you on these 5 pledges?
Not great news. I'm actually in a lot of agreement with Fraser Nelson from The Spectator, which is quite an odd thing for me to be in, but life comes at you fast. Having inflation, I think that is hugely problematic, because inflation is proving way more sticky than he first thought. We don't know what's happening with the geopolitical situation, and while energy prices might come down, food prices are still really, really high, and there is this lag between inflation going down and people feeling it. So I think that's going to be a fail. Because inflation is so high, interest rates have had to go up. This is going to really harm the economy. In order to cool down the economy, which is what the Bank of England has had to do by putting interest rates up, there could even be a recession. So this is not going to just be really difficult for all of us. It's going to be particularly difficult for businesses as well. And of course, related to the economy, debt falling, it's absolutely not going to fall. As Fraser said, it's already had to go up for some very worthy causes, including furlough. When Rishi Sunak was Chancellor, they've just had to put some more money into the NHS. But that means that debt is going up. The interest is going up to service the debt. So there's absolutely no way that the debt's going to fall. Waiting lists, next to the cost of living crisis, NHS waiting lists are sort of the number 2 issue for most people around the country. And while some good work has gone into this NHS workforce plan, it's like putting water into a bath and you haven't got the plug in it. There's so many people leaving the NHS strike. So I think all of that's going to have a huge problem for waiting lists. And finally, stop the small boats. I mean, I disagree with Tim. I agree with you. I think he made stopping the small boats the central plank. That's what people remember. That is not happening. We're just in the beginning of summer. The numbers are getting higher and higher.
OK. Take a seat. Thank you very much.
Click here for another Think Tank Watch with Emily Carver from the IEA Getting Shirty.